Thank you very much, Rita. Well, that is a hard act to follow, particularly if you're a scientist. So I don't have any beautiful visuals like that. So what I work on, I'm a neurobiologist. I'm in the Department of Integrative Biology and Physiology and Neurobiology here at UCLA. And my interest is in the cell biology of learning and memory. And in particular, I'm fascinated by the question of how does the brain maintain memories over the course of years, decades, or in some cases a lifetime. And this is one of the most, I'm a little biased, but this is one of the most interesting biological problems I think there is. And I chose, following my mentor's steps, I chose to study it in an animal that many people would be surprised even learns anything, which is a snail. And the snail that I work on is shown here, a cartoon of the snail. And it's a marine snail, and it actually lives here in California. So if you are ever snorkeling in Malibu, you will see these snails, and they'll be in tide pools. And if you study them carefully, you'll see that they're eating seaweed. So you might not think that's very interesting, but if you spend long hours studying them very carefully, you'll see that they basically eat seaweed. But they also are capable of learning, and that's what I study. So what I study is a very primitive kind of learning called sensitization. And basically, this would be if you are exposed to some alarming stimulus, you will become hyper-reflexive to all stimuli after that. So this is a very primitive kind of learning. It's non-associative. But in these snails, they can remember for a very long time, depending on the experience. And so in these experiments, what we do in order to sensitize them is we give them sort of mild electrical shocks to their tail. And after that, they become hyper-reflexive. So if you were, after giving them the shocks, if you were to come up and touch them on their skin, they would contract very strongly. And that's how they show you that they've had this aversive memory. And for years, I've been studying this memory, and one of the common ideas in our field is that memory, when an animal learns something, there are changes in the connections that join the neurons, and they reorganize as a result of experience. And so for years, I have studied that, and I've been very interested in that. But recently, and this is kind of ironic, given that the theme of this is cells, this is recently I've become, my thinking has changed, and I've come to believe that the memory is not really in the synaptic connections. Really, it's in the cell, and it's in the nucleus of the cell. And somehow, the nucleus of the cell changes as a result of learning, and that persists. And it's independent, in a sense, of the changes in synaptic connections. So this is a radical idea in my field. Indeed, it's heretical, I would say. I think that's fair to say. But I wanted to try to establish this idea. And so we thought, well, what is it that is producing these changes in the nucleus? And many of you will be familiar from your freshman biology of DNA, of course, which encodes genes. And the way you get proteins is the DNA is transcribed into RNA, and then the RNA encodes for proteins, and that's pretty basic biology. But it turns out there are a whole new class of RNAs that don't encode proteins, and we don't really know what they do. And one of the things that these RNAs are involved in is changing the, producing nuclear changes, changing the likelihood that genes will be expressed. That's one of the things they do. So we thought, well, maybe what we could do is take a snail, train it, and then extract its RNA and inject it into a snail that has never experienced electrical shocks. And that snail would act as though it had been shocked. So that was the experiment that we did, and that's shown here. And to the astonishment of my lab, it succeeded. And so, so now we're trying to figure out just what is it that is changed in the snail? How does the RNA change what we believe are the changes in the snail? But the idea is, and I'm increasingly coming to this belief, is that it is perhaps the case that many of the neurons in our brains are unique, and they're unique because the experience has changed, produced intrinsic changes in the neurons. And so that's going to be something that's going to drive my research. And it's kind of ironic. I haven't even had that thought really until I was sitting here listening to Meredith. I'm thinking, well, that's what I'm moving towards, the idea that individual cells have their own unique identities, and that's due to their own unique experiences. So I think I'll let it drop there. Thank you. Thank you for your time.